By the end of the Devonian, a new frontier became available to all life on Earth: land. As more plants and food sources appeared, land was full of niches for animals to fill. And, along with insects, our ancestors took that opportunity and ventured onto land. To truly conquer land, though, our ancestors will have to go through many evolutionary changes. This is the story of how our ancestors and all other land vertebrates took over the world. During the Carboniferous, Earth's continents would slowly start to drift together. Earth would also technically enter an ice age, with ice caps forming at both poles. But, unlike our most recent ice age, life was not under the pressures of cold winters. In fact, most of Earth at this time was tropical, with vast rainforests all across the globe, and near the equator is where the highest density of forests arose. Let's now take a look at how life has adapted to the rainforests of the Carboniferous. This is a Carboniferous rainforest. Many plants evolved during the Carboniferous, but not many of them are familiar to us today. There are no flowering plants like grasses, flowers, or true trees. This is a world filled with lycopods, ferns, and gymnosperms. Ferns are most abundant in these Carboniferous forests. Ferns are a group of plants that are mostly defined by their ability to reproduce via spores. This plant right here is a calamite, a type of fern called a horsetail. During the Carboniferous, they could grow as large as 30 to 50 meters high. Besides calamites, another type of fern is the tree fern, a type of tree that still exists today, and they could reach just as high as calamites during the Carboniferous, about 30 to 50 meters. Some other types of plant include lycophytes, another type of spore-producing plant that was somewhat similar to ferns, and some primitive seed-bearing plants, like conifers. With this abundance of plants releasing oxygen in the atmosphere, forests are a lot more vulnerable to flooding, which is common here in the Mason Creek Formation. So, most animals have tried to find shelter under fallen logs and plants, hopefully waiting out the storm. Thankfully, there wasn't any flooding, and as morning dawns, the residents of the forest have started to stir. These forests may not only have changed the weather, but also the way certain animals have evolved. This is Meganeura, the falcon-sized griffin fly. I say griffin fly because it's not exactly related to modern-day dragonflies, with Meganeura belonging to the group Meganosoptera. It was 40 centimeters long and had a wingspan of 70 centimeters. Meganeura wasn't the only giant flying insect though. There are plenty of other species of similar sizes, like Mazotheros, which unlike Meganeura, fed on the abundant plant matter of the Carboniferous. For these insects though, it was best to stick to the skies, as if they got too low, they risk facing the giant amphibians. With an abundance of rain in freshwater lakes and rivers, it was a paradise for the amphibians, especially because there weren't any more giant freshwater fish. This species is called megalocephalus, an almost crocodile-like amphibian that can reach up to 1.5 meters. It's best for most animals to not intrude on their territory, as these amphibians can be highly territorial, even to other members of its kind. Another amphibian approaches, called Colosteus. It's headed downriver looking for food, but fortunately for it, it's headed too far into Megalocephalus's territory. Further up the river, though, is an animal even larger than either of the amphibians. This was an almost 3-meter long millipede, and it was called Arthropleura. Being a millipede means that it doesn't have the pincers of a centipede, so it will have to rely on its defenses and intimidation to defend against the amphibian. Arthropleura is the largest arthropod ever discovered, but luckily for the animals of the Carboniferous, it was a vegetarian, feeding on the vast vegetation of the Carboniferous. With a vast array of giant insects in the Carboniferous, it's fair to question why modern-day insects aren't as big. Well, the answer relies on plants. The thing about arthropods is that they don't have lungs like vertebrates. Rather, they have a series of connected tissues throughout their body that takes in oxygen. This effectively limits the size of insects, because today there isn't enough oxygen for insects to grow to vast sizes. But during the Carboniferous, the oxygen level was about 30% higher, which meant that insects could then grow to their enormous size. And of course, you can't get to a 30% higher oxygen level without a surplus of plant life. So, underneath the feet of giant amphibians and arthropods lies a different, smaller world, one where the next step in tetrapod evolution was happening. Besides giant griffinflies and millipedes, there were other groups of insects that emerged during the Carboniferous. This included primitive cockroaches and spiders. But among those small critters lied some of the earliest amniotes. Amniotes are defined as animals that develop inside an embryo, surrounded by amnion and chorion, and possesses an elentuus. We will get to what that means later, but today it includes all reptiles, birds, and mammals. During the Carboniferous, we can find the ancestors to all those groups. This species is called Archaeothyris, and it's about 50 centimeters long. This is another amniote called Petrolacosaurus, and it was about 40 centimeters long and looking for the same food as Archaeothyris. Despite all these animals looking like lizards, they are not true lizards, and some of them will evolve into something completely different, with all of them having different traits. Take Archaeothyris, for example. On the outside, it looks like a lizard, but looking at its skull, we can actually see mammal-like traits, like a single opening at the back of its skull, and different types of teeth. Archaeothyris is the first synapsid, the group that includes all mammals and their relatives. This means that the descendants of animals like Archaeothyris will eventually evolve into mammals. In contrast, the skull of Petrolacosaurus has two openings behind the skull, and more so similar looking teeth. These are the traits of a sauropsid, the group that includes all modern-day reptiles, birds, and their relatives. That means that the sauropsids will not only evolve into reptiles and birds, but also dinosaurs. After the sauropsids and synapsids split 312 million years ago, there was an offshoot of the sauropsids with no openings behind their skull, called parareptiles. They have no modern-day relatives, but will evolve into interesting forms during the next time period. With all the different traits of amniotes during this time, there is one similarity they all share. The trait that gives them their name: hard-shelled eggs. This trait may seem normal today, but during the Carboniferous, it was completely new. It freed them from having to lay their eggs in the water, and with amniotes also evolving skin that keeps in moisture, these tetrapods are now fully free from the water, making them fully terrestrial. There are a couple basic parts that make up an amniote egg. First, there's the shell, which keeps all of the parts inside the egg. Then there's the chorion, which is the membrane that surrounds the embryo. Then there is the amnion, the part that gives the name to amniotes. That is the innermost layer that surrounds the embryo. And finally, there is the allantois, that is the membrane below the chorion that acts as an outer growth of the embryo's gut. Despite most mammals not laying eggs, most of the parts stay the same, with some of them acting as part of the placenta, which we will discuss what that is later. These eggs are highly nutritious and can make a great dinner for other animals. Most amniotes were small compared to their amphibian and arthropod neighbors, as their traits wouldn't exactly catch on until the next time period. But one species came close. Meet Desmatodon. At 3 meters long, it was the largest amniote of the Carboniferous. It had a herbivorous diet, making it the first tetrapod ever to do so. Desmatodon and its relatives are thought to have been a sister group to the synapsids, but might have also been a sort of reptilomorph that might have not have been a true amniote, but a transitional form between amphibians and amniotes. Today, like most days in the Carboniferous, was humid, but this humidity would lead to constant rainfall, and as storm clouds come overhead, rain becomes more and more likely, and there is now another risk of flooding. Animals try to find shelter wherever they can, and it's especially hard for large animals like Arthropleura. Flying insects have to be especially careful, as if their wings get too wet, they won't be able to fly. The amphibians seem to be enjoying the rain the most, as they don't have to worry as much about their skin drying out on land. The amniotes would have to hide inside fallen logs and leaves to find shelter from the rain. And the amniotes in this log all seem to have the same idea. Now, all the animals who haven't found immediate shelter or left the area would be flooded. Floods will be drained by a river delta system that is in the Mason Creek Formation. The delta will carry things like ferns, various other plants, and some invertebrates to the ocean that is nearby, where they will be fossilized and studied by scientists millions of years later. It has been around 57 million years since the Devonian extinction event, the extinction that primarily affected life in the oceans. Life has of course recovered since then, and one of the animals that have recovered are trilobites. Trilobites, though, aren't doing as well as they used to. The Devonian extinction only left about 4% of trilobites left. The extinction also wiped out all of the placoderms, the armored fish, which left the niche of apex predators in the ocean open, and the animals that took that niche were primitive sharks. This is Bandringa, a primitive shark that resembles a modern-day sawfish, but that is merely a case of convergent evolution. Most specimens measured at about 11 centimeters. The Devonian shark Stethecanthus was still around during the Carboniferous, inhabiting salt and freshwater ecosystems. This shark is called Dracopristis. It measured at about 2 meters and belongs to an extinct order of shark called the Tinacanthiforms. This animal is a remnant of a bygone era, being one of the last eurypterid sea scorpions, called Campylocephalus. Instead of being an active predator, these sea scorpions are scavengers that feed on small invertebrates and whatever else is on the sea floor. It's quite a humble end to what used to be on the top of the food chain. Out of all of these animals, though, one is the most horrific. An animal so inconceivable, scientists don't even know what it is. Meet the Tully monster. At 35 centimeters, this animal is quite possibly the weirdest animal ever discovered. It had a trunk like proboscis along with a wide eye stalk with a tail. That's about all scientists can deduce from this animal, because they don't even know how to classify it. It is thought to be either a relative of worms, mollusks, or jealous fish called conodonts. Scientists are still to this day trying to deduce what this animal is, as it's been a great paleontological mystery since its discovery in 1955. Life in the oceans were going good by the end of the Carboniferous, and would for a while. On land, though, changes to the continent would affect all life and determine the course of evolution for tetrapods. At the end of the Carboniferous, there would be an event that would cause the fall of the vast Carboniferous rainforests, called the Carboniferous Rainforest Collapse, and there are a couple factors that led to this. One of the main reasons is that at the end of the Carboniferous, most of Earth's continents had conjoined into one giant supercontinent called Pangaea, and this caused a lot of mountain ranges to form inland, and mountains often block moisture from getting to certain areas, which effectively reduced the amount of rainforests on the globe. The ice age that has been around since the Carboniferous is still going on, and is now having drastic effects on the climate, essentially cooling it in certain regions. This now leaves us at the beginning of the Permian period, 299 million years ago. We have approached the final time period of the Paleozoic era. Life has come a long way since the time of the Cambrian, and at the end of this period, life will have to face its greatest challenge yet. The only question now is, who will rule Pangaea? We are now in the Permian period, 280 million years ago. Across Pangaea, we can find many various environments, including deserts, some cold and some hot, and humid swamps, like we are in now. These more varied environments have limited the range of amphibians, but in the swamps, they are prospering. This amphibian is called Cacops, and belongs to the most common order of amphibians in the Permian, the Temnospondyls, a now extinct group of amphibians that have been around since the middle of the Carboniferous. They have seen great success since then, branching into large forms like Eriops, a 2-meter long amphibian, and was one of the largest Temnospondyls of all time. In the Permian, though, amphibians are no longer the dominant tetrapod. That honor would go to the synapsids. This is Dimetrodon. At 4 meters long and 1.5 meters tall, it was the apex predator of its ecosystem, and its main prey was amphibians. Dimetrodon was a synapsid, the clade that eventually led to mammals, and Dimetrodon was part of the family Sphenagodontidae, which are carnivorous synapsids that possess various types of scales. This Dimetrodon has found its prey, Diplocaulus, a boomerang-shaped temnospondyle. An older male has come across this juvenile Dimetrodon and uses its slightly more colored sail to show dominance toward the younger animal. The most likely use for this sail was sexual display, as if a sail was bigger or had more colors, Dimetrodon could use it to scare off rivals and attract mates. In this case, Dimetrodon has used its sail to scare off another individual and test his luck hunting for amphibians. Sometimes there's an amphibian that you don't want to mess with. This Dimetrodon will keep testing its luck, but will move on when hunting proves unsuccessful. Due to more drier environments in the Permian, plants have evolved to deal with these conditions. There are various ferns, conifers, and a new type of plant, cycads. Plenty of synapsids have evolved to eat the plant matter, and Edaphosaurus is one of the best at it. Edaphosaurids possessed peg-like teeth that were evolved to strip the leaves of plants. During the Carboniferous, terrestrial herbivores were relatively rare, but in the Permian, there were more species of herbivores than ever, so this broad niche was here to stay. Edaphosaurus would have been one of the largest herbivores of the early Permian, being 3.5 meters long, and despite the resemblance to Dimetrodon, they are only distantly related, but both were still synapsids. The Diadectids from the Carboniferous were still around during the Permian, with species like Diadectus taking advantage of the plants of the Permian. The juvenile Dimetrodon has stumbled upon these herbivores, and after being driven away from its usual hunting grounds, it will try its luck with them. Trying to hunt the large Edaphosaur could lead to an injury, so it will have to go after the Diadectids. It will also have to make sure not to spook the Edaphosaurus, and will have to wait for the right moment to strike. The other Dimetrodon had the same idea after no luck with amphibians, so the younger Dimetrodon will have to beat the older one to the Diadectus. The older Dimetrodon gets the attention of the Edaphosaurids, delaying its hunt. The juvenile's hunt may have been wasted, as the older Dimetrodon could scare it off its kill. One of the reasons Dimetrodon was such a successful predator was its variation of teeth. It had caniforms, a primitive version of canines, incisors at the front of the jaw, and molar-like teeth in the back. These multiple types of teeth are still found in mammals today, so although Dimetrodon isn't our direct ancestor, it's thanks to its relatives that we have the multiple types of teeth found in mammals. This is another synapsid, Ophiachodon. It belongs to the same family as Dimetrodon, but it lacks its iconic sail. The Ophiachodon has been scavenging around the area, and if it wants a piece of the Diadectus, it will have to wait until Dimetrodon is done. Dimetrodon left nothing but bone, so the Ophiachodon will have to find food elsewhere. Ophiachodon could measure at 3 meters long and technically had one of the largest skulls of any primitive synapsid, measuring at about 50 centimeters. The Ophiachodon has found a potential prey item, Cassia, another type of primitive synapsid which is defined by its small head. With all these primitive synapsids in the early Permian, this animal was one of the few sauropsids, the evolutionary line that eventually lead to reptiles and birds. This is Captorinus, a type of primitive reptile that has no modern-day relatives and could provide a good snack for Ophiachodon. Ophiachodon has been around since the end of the Carboniferous, and it even shows that since then, synapsids started with the evolutionary advantage over the sauropsids. So why then were synapsids so much more successful than sauropsids during the Permian? Well, there are a couple reasons they might have. Their variation in teeth might have allowed them to access more food sources and become better hunters. Synapsids may have also been endothermic, or warm-blooded, as some of the sails that various synapsids possessed may have allowed them to control their body temperature better. Whatever the reasons, Pangea started as a world ruled by stem mammals, the evolutionary branches from the synapsid family tree. After a day of foraging for food, the Edaphosaurids have gone to get a drink by the swamp, but down in the swamps, they'll have to watch out for giant temnospondyls. Despite the various diversification of amniotes, the various giant amphibians still rule the waters. But as the Permian will go on, changes to the environment would limit the range of amphibians and change the evolutionary line of synapsids. During the Middle Permian, there was an extinction event called Olson's extinction. It's a relatively unknown extinction that is more so identified by the shift in terrestrial synapsids and reptilomorphs. The primitive synapsids we've been covering so far are called the pelycosaurs, but during the Middle Permian, a new clade of synapsid had evolved, most likely from a species of Sphenacodontidae called the therapsids. They differ from the pelycosaurs by having limbs positioned more underneath their body, a larger opening behind the skull for a stronger bite, and had more advanced incisors and larger canines. The most likely cause for this extinction was climate change, as when Pangea came closer and closer together, the climate started to become more dry and arid, leading to more deserts. With the continued diversification of therapsids, their evolution would lead to many interesting animals to evolve. We are now in the middle to late Permian period, 260 million years ago. Due to the continued movements of the continents, Pangea has gotten more drier. Both animals and plants would have to adapt to this environment if they wanted to survive. This is moss chops, a large therapsid herbivore. It evolved peg-like teeth and a large gut to process tough nutrient-poor plants like cycads. It's a species of Dinocephalin, a suborder of therapsids that have ruled since the Middle Permian, after the die-off of the pelycosaurs. But they have recently been in decline as new species of therapsids and reptiles have better evolved to thrive in these more arid-like conditions. This is Bradysaurus, a species of parareptile. Parareptiles are a clade of sauropsid and have no surviving relatives. They are distinct by having no openings behind their skull and have seen success as large-bodied herbivores and will eventually outcompete herbivores like moss chops. Besides herbivores like moss chops, new predatory therapsids have evolved. This is Gorgonops, a species of Gorgonopsid. It was around the size of a coyote, being around 2 meters in length. It is looking for prey, and if it gets a good jump on the Bradysaurus, it could have its meal. The ambush proves futile, as one of the biggest evolutionary advantages of Bradysaurus, armored scutes on its body, saves the animal. The armored scutes on Bradysaurus define the clade of parareptiles called Paraeosaurs, and Bradysaurus is one of the earliest of these animals. Gorgonops possessed fairly large canines and less sprawled legs, which not only made it almost mammal-like in appearance, but a fairly successful hunter. This is Robertia. It belonged to the clade of therapsids called Dicynodonts. Dicynodonts are characterized by their beaks and tusks. They covered a variety of different niches, with Robertia almost being like the squirrel of its time. Robertia was also a burrowing animal, a trait that quite a few Dicynodonts share. There are numerous evolutionary advantages to burrowing. It not only allows protection from extreme temperatures, but also allows protection from certain predators and access to plant tubers, which contain nutrients and water. No matter how much Gorgonops digs, it won't be able to reach Robertia. After a long day of hunting, the Gorgonops decides to take a drink from a watering hole, but it's being guarded by another species of Dinocephalian. This is Joncuria, a species of therapsid Dinocephalian. It's a relatively large animal, being about 3 meters long and about 1.2 meters in height, and was most likely omnivorous. Joncuria guards this watering hole, as even basic resources like water are heavily contested in these deserts. This Brachiosaurus also wants to take a drink here, and will have to earn the right from this Joncuria. Brachiosaurus's defensive form gives it the edge against Joncuria, giving it the right to drink. This Mosschops also wants to get a drink from the watering hole, but the Joncuria and Brachiosaurus get to decide who drinks. This Robertia couple have been busy, as they have been taking care of a brood of eggs, and have been collecting nesting materials for them. Robertia aren't the only Dicynodonts around, as there are even some species that have filled the large herbivore niche, like this species, Allocephalodon. Allocephalodon possesses 2 nasal bosses on its snout, possibly used to attract mates. This Gorgonops has gone a while without food, and this Allocephalodon could make a good meal. The Gorgonops makes good use of its canines and gets its first kill in weeks, and tries to eat as much as it can off the Dicynodont. A Joncuria has picked up the scent of flesh, and will try to use its intimidation to scare off the hungry Gorgonops. Joncuria uses its large size to its advantage and scares off the Gorgonops. An omnivorous diet can help in a desert environment, so no food source is wasted. Lurking around the corner, though, is an opportunistic animal, one that represents the next stage in synapsid evolution, an animal called Procynosuchus. Procynosuchus is a cynodont, a clade of therapsids that are usually small and carnivorous. Cynodonts, compared to some other therapsids, have some traits that make them fairly mammal-like, including a large temporal fenestra, which is the opening behind all synapsid skulls, a fairly large dentary bone in their lower jaw, and were likely endothermic or warm-blooded, which meant that some cynodonts likely possessed fur. Procynosuchus was one of the earliest cynodonts, and eventually, cynodonts would evolve into true mammals. The watering hole has dried up. All of the larger animals will have to look for a different body of water, but some of the smaller animals, requiring less nutrients, can wait out the drought until rains return. The Procynosuchus is trying to dig below the dried up bed, as it might be able to find water buried in the ground.
This Allocephalodon has gotten to the watering hole too late. If rain doesn't come soon, it could risk succumbing to the drought. This Robertia has come to the watering hole at the wrong time. Not only is there no water, but there's also a fast and nimble predator. By trying to flee the cynodont by hiding in its burrow, the Robertia risked leading an animal small enough to fit inside it. The Robertia will have to sacrifice their brood if they want to escape with their own lives. Luckily, the Robertia couple installed a second entrance where they could escape, and will now live to fight another day. As the Permian went on, Pangaea kept getting hotter and hotter, with large portions of Pangaea being covered in deserts. Life could only adapt to these conditions for so long until it reached a tipping point, and by the end of the Permian, it did. During the late Permian, life had it especially hard. Conditions on Earth are getting worse, and is driving many species to extinction. There are relatively few large animals left, with the Periosaurus and Gorgonopsids being the exceptions, evolving into animals like Inostrancevia and Scutosaurus. Inostrancevia could get to the size of a lion and was the fiercest predator of its time. It evolved to hunt armored animals like Scutosaurus. The Dicynodonts held on throughout the late Permian. This is Lishosaurus, a meter-long animal that evolved during the late Permian. It was a burrowing animal, and is particularly adaptable to these arid-like conditions. The Inostrancevia may be full, but is dehydrated and suffocating. There has been a rise in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, making it harder for large animals to breathe. Over the Permian, we have seen a gradual drying of the environment, but at the end of the Permian, the reasons for these arid conditions aren't natural. Life is seeing a die-off like never before, and it's becoming a mass extinction. Over the course of the Paleozoic era, we have seen major evolutionary leaps that, without them, we wouldn't have the world we have today. But what seems to be a trend with many of the time periods is a lot of them end with some kind of mass extinction that always changes the trajectory of life going forward. But at the end of the Paleozoic, there was an extinction event so bad that it represents the boundary between the Paleozoic and Mesozoic eras. It was an event that almost wiped out all life on Earth, and this event was the Great Dying. So what caused this extinction event? Well, during the Permian, in what is now Siberia, there was a large mantle plume, an event where a large amount of magma seeps to the surface, which led to a sea of lava covering 2 million square kilometers. This would eventually lead to a large eruption from the plumes. This would temporarily black out the sun due to the ash and dust, but once the ash cleared, the worst effects from the magma plumes showed, because the plumes released greenhouse gases and other chemicals, which broke down the ozone layer and raised the global temperature and acidified the oceans. The number of species that went extinct because of all this was devastating. In the oceans, life was hit even harder than on land. About 59% of bivalves went extinct, which made them a lot more lucky compared to some other invertebrates. If there were any Eurypterids left by the late Permian, they would have gone extinct. 96% of brachiopods went extinct, along with 96% of all corals, 98% of all crinoids, 97% of all ammonites, 98% of gastropods, and most sadly of them all, the trilobites, the little arthropods that have been around for 270 million years that had endured 2 other massive extinctions, had finally been fully wiped out. Overall, 96% of all marine species went extinct. On land, life didn't fare much better. Many plant species, like different types of gymnosperms and ferns, went extinct. As much as 85% of all insect species went extinct, which is the highest amount insects have suffered for an extinction ever. The vertebrates suffered heavy losses as well. 75% of all reptiles went extinct, with the armored parasaurs being completely wiped out, with relatively few parareptiles left. On land, amphibians had it the hardest. Around 90% of temnospondyls and amphibians went extinct. The synapsids greatly decreased in diversity as well, with many of Lystrosaurus's Dicynodont cousins dying out, along with all Gorgonopsids. 70% of life on land was wiped out. Overall, 96% of all life on Earth went extinct. Despite everything seeming doom and gloom, there is hope for life on Earth. There were quite a few survivors of this extinction, and the survivors would change the trajectory of life going forward, just like all other mass extinctions. And this leaves us in the beginning of the Mesozoic era. Coming from a mass extinction that wiped out 96% of all life, it will take a while to recover. But when life eventually recovers, it will lead to the evolution of some of the most incredible animals to ever live.